The morning sun had just begun to rise over the hills when Marcus noticed her. He had been tending to his family's farm as usual, scattering feed for the chickens in the misty dawn, when the air around the old oak tree started to shimmer like heat waves on a summer day. At first, he thought it was merely an illusion caused by the early light, but then she stepped through what appeared to be a rift in reality itself, a woman unlike any he had ever seen or imagined. Her hair was pure platinum, floating as if suspended in zero gravity, catching the sunlight like strands of starlight. Her eyes were the deepest blue imaginable, swirling with what looked like galaxies, ancient and mysterious. Her attire was beyond description, a dress that seemed to be made of living light, flowing around her form like liquid moonbeams. Where her feet touched the dewy grass, tiny sparkles of light danced upward, as if the earth itself was responding to her otherworldly presence. Marcus stood frozen, the feed bag slipping from his nerveless fingers. The chickens scattered, but he barely noticed. The woman, if that's what she was, tilted her head slightly, studying him with those cosmic eyes. "Your planet's atmospheric composition is quite fascinating," she said, her voice carrying musical undertones that made his skin tingle. "Though your star burns rather intensely." She gestured gracefully toward the sun, leaving trails of light in the air. Marcus found his voice, though it came out barely more than a whisper. What are you?" She smiled, and it felt like witnessing the birth of a star. "My name would be unpronounceable in your language, but you may call me Lyra, only improve. I'm from what you would call the Andromeda Galaxy, though that's a vast oversimplification of my origin." She moved closer, her movements unnaturally fluid, as if gravity was merely a suggestion. "I'm what you might call a dimensional researcher. My people study parallel universes and their various life forms." "Are you allowed to be here?" Marcus asked, noticing how the air around her seemed to bend and shimmer. Lyra's laughter was like wind chimes in a cosmic breeze. "Not exactly. Contact with developing civilizations is strictly forbidden," she replied, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "But I've always found rules to be more like guidelines, especially when I encounter something truly intriguing." The way she looked at him when she said intriguing made Marcus's heart skip several beats. She moved even closer, and he caught a scent reminiscent of summer rain and stardust. "Your species fascinates me," she continued, reaching out to touch his arm. Where her fingers made contact, warmth spread through his entire body. "You're so young in cosmic terms, yet you feel things so intensely. Your emotions are like supernovas. Brilliant, powerful, impossible to ignore." Marcus found himself drawn into her orbit, unable and unwilling to look away. "Why did you choose this farm, this moment?" Lyra's smile turned mysterious. "Perhaps it wasn't a choice at all. Sometimes the universe creates its own intersections." She glanced at the sky, which had taken on an unusual iridescent quality. "I don't have much time. My people will notice the dimensional breach soon," she said, moving closer still until he could see the swirling galaxies in her eyes in detail. "I'd very much like to learn more about human experiences before I go." The air around them seemed to crackle with energy, and Marcus knew he was standing on the edge of something monumental. The simple farm around them faded into insignificance, as Lyra's presence filled his world with possibilities he had never imagined. "Would you be willing to teach me," she asked, her voice resonating with his very atoms, "about what it means to be human?" In that moment, as the morning sun painted the sky in colors that seemed to match the shifting patterns of her dress, Marcus realized his ordinary life had just become extraordinary. Despite every rational thought telling him to be cautious, he found himself nodding, drawn irresistibly into the gravity well of her cosmic allure. The chickens had long since wandered away, and the morning chores lay forgotten. Above them, the sky rippled with unusual patterns, but neither of them looked up. They were too caught in each other's gravity, about to embark on an adventure that would challenge the laws of physics and desire alike. As the morning sun climbed higher, Marcus led Lyra through the fields behind his farm. She moved with ethereal grace, occasionally floating a few inches off the ground before catching herself, as if remembering to maintain appearances. "Your world has such fascinating organic structures," she mused, running her hand along the tall grass. Where her fingers touched the plants, they briefly glowed with a soft luminescence. "On my world, everything is crystalline and geometric. We've engineered the chaos out of our environment." She turned to him with a smile that made his heart race. "Perhaps that's why I find your world so intoxicating." They reached Marcus's favorite spot, a secluded pond surrounded by ancient willows. The water reflected Lyra's otherworldly glow, creating patterns like starlight on its surface. "Tell me," she said, moving closer to him, "do humans still experience physical attraction? My people evolved beyond such primitive responses long ago." Her eyes studied him with scientific curiosity, but there was something else there too, a hunger that seemed very human indeed. Marcus swallowed hard, intensely aware of her proximity. "Yes, we definitely do." "Fascinating," she replied, tracing a finger along his jaw. Marcus. Where she touched, warmth spread like liquid starlight through his body. "And these responses? Heightened heart rate? Dilated pupils? Elevated body temperature? They're automatic? Uncontrollable?" "Pretty much," Marcus managed, his voice rough. Lyra's dress shimmered, becoming slightly more translucent. "My people would be horrified by such loss of control. They believe physical intimacy leads to quantum entanglement between beings." Her smile turned mischievous. "They're probably right." Above them, the sky had taken on an unusual shimmering quality, like oil on water. Lyra glanced up briefly, a flicker of concern crossing her features. "They're looking for me," she whispered. "Dimensional breaches leave traces they can follow." She turned back to Marcus, her stellar eyes intense. "I don't have much time, but—" She moved even closer, her scent like cosmic rain filling his senses. "Helps past. Perhaps that makes this moment even more precious." The air between them crackled with energy, both literal and metaphorical. Marcus knew this was dangerous. She was an alien being, likely breaking countless laws of her civilization just by being here. But as her luminescent form drew nearer to his, all rational thought began to fade, like stardust in the wind. "Your scientists would call this a violation of multiple laws of physics," Lyra murmured, her lips now inches from his. "My people would call it corruption of a developing species." Her hands found his chest, sending sparks of energy through his body. "What would you call it?" Marcus looked into her eyes, seeing galaxies spin in their depths. "I'd call it inevitable," he said, and closed the distance between them. Their first kiss was like touching a live wire, energy coursing between them, making the air itself glow with aurora-like lights. The willow branches above them began to sway in a non-existent wind, and small objects around them started to float as Lyra's control over gravity wavered. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard, though Marcus wasn't sure if Lyra actually needed to breathe or was just mimicking his response. "Well," she said, her voice carrying new harmonics that made the air vibrate, "it seems some primitive responses are worth preserving after all." The sky above them was beginning to show distinct geometric patterns now, signs that her people were getting closer to finding her, but neither of them looked up. They were too caught in each other's gravity, falling towards something that would either destroy them or transform them entirely. The afternoon sun found them in Marcus's barn, away from prying eyes and the increasingly strange patterns forming in the sky. Lyra's natural glow provided all the illumination they needed, her form radiating a soft stellar light that made the ordinary space feel magical. "Your molecular structure is fascinating," Lyra murmured, trailing her fingers along his arm, leaving traces of luminescence on his skin. So densely packed with potential energy, her dress had become more ethereal, shifting between solid and starlight as her control wavered with her emotions. "My people would never believe that such primitive beings could generate such intense quantum responses." The barn around them seemed to pulse with energy. Where they touched, small sparks of cosmic light danced between them. Marcus could feel his body responding to her otherworldly presence, every cell vibrating at a new frequency. "What happens if they catch us?" he asked, though he couldn't bring himself to pull away. Lyra's laugh was like distant chimes. "They'll try to reset my quantum signature, erase any trace of this encounter." Her stellar eyes met his with fierce intensity. "But they don't understand. Some connections transcend physical laws." She pressed closer, her form radiating heat like a captured star. The air around them began to shimmer, reality itself seeming to bend in response to their proximity. Small objects started floating around them, as Lyra's control over dimensional forces slipped further. "We shouldn't," she whispered, even as her hands traced patterns of light across his chest. "The dimensional barriers are already weakening. If we—" She paused, her breath catching as Marcus's hands found her waist. "If we fully connect, it could tear a hole between realities." Her eyes. Marcus could see the conflict in her eyes. Duty warring with desire, cosmic law fighting against something more primal and powerful. Above them, through the barn's roof, the geometric search patterns were becoming more intense. "Maybe some laws are meant to be broken," he said, pulling her closer. Lyra's response was to kiss him with an intensity that made the air itself ignite with stellar fire. Their bodies came together as the boundaries between human and stellar being, between their dimensions, began to blur and fade. The barn filled with aurora-like lights as they gave in to their desires, their union transcending mere physical pleasure to become something cosmic and profound. Reality itself seemed to shift and bend around them as they created their own laws of physics, their own universe of two. In the aftermath, as they lay entwined in a cocoon of starlight, both knew that nothing would ever be the same. The dimensional barriers had been irreversibly weakened, and their beings had become quantum entangled in ways that no force in any universe could undo. "They're coming," Lyra said softly, her form flickering between solid and energy as the search patterns intensified. "But they can't undo what we've become." Above them, the sky had turned into a kaleidoscope of impossible geometries as two universes began to collide. The aftermath of their union had transformed the barn into something otherworldly. Objects floated freely, defying gravity, and trails of stellar energy danced through the air like auroras. Lyra's form kept shifting between solid and ethereal, her control over her physical manifestation weakened by their intense connection. "Something's changing," she said, her voice carrying new harmonics that made the air vibrate. Rising, she created a small window in space, through which Marcus could see her world crystalline cities floating in an aurora-filled sky. "The barriers between dimensions are collapsing faster than I expected." Above them, the search patterns had transformed into a complex geometric net closing in on their location. Lyra's people were no longer just searching, they were preparing to intervene. "They'll try to separate us," Lyra said, her stellar eyes fixed on Marcus, "but there's another way." Her form pulsed with intense light as she extended her hand to him. "You could come with me." "To your dimension?" Marcus asked, his heart racing. "No," her smile held secrets of 1,000 galaxies. "A sense. To somewhere between, a pocket universe created by our quantum entanglement. They wouldn't be able to follow the physics we created together. It's completely new. Skill." The barn began to shake as reality itself started to tear around them. They had mere moments to decide. "It's dangerous," Lyra warned, her voice carrying both excitement and fear. "We'd be the first to attempt this. We might become something entirely new. Neither human nor stellar being." Marcus looked at their entwined hands, his solid human flesh against her shimmering stellar form, and made his choice. Just as the dimensional net began to close around them, he pulled her close and whispered, "Let's rewrite the laws of physics." The universe held its breath as they stepped together into the unknown. Their transition created a shockwave that rippled across multiple dimensions. For a moment that felt both brief and eternal, Marcus felt his body dissolve and reform, his consciousness expanding beyond human limitations. Lyra's presence anchored him as they fell through layers of reality, finally emerging in a space that defied description. Their new realm existed between dimensions, a pocket universe born from their union. Here, the laws of physics bent to accommodate their new hybrid existence. Marcus was no longer fully human, and Lyra was no longer a pure stellar being. They had become something gloriously unprecedented, live-curated. "Look what we've created," Lyra whispered, her form now a perfect blend of physical and energy. Around them, their shared consciousness had shaped a reality that combined the best of both their worlds. Crystalline structures that grew like living things, oceans of liquid starlight, and skies that shimmered with countless auroras. Time moved differently here. They could feel the ripples of their choice spreading across the dimensions. Through the quantum field, they sensed others like them, beings from different universes who had dared to love across dimensional boundaries, drawn to the sanctuary they had created. "Your people have stopped searching," Marcus observed, feeling the changed patterns in the higher dimensions. Lyra smiled, her stellar eyes filled with triumph. "They're studying us instead. We've proved that evolution doesn't always follow predicted paths. Love, it seems, can create its own physics." They had become living proof that the boundaries between species and dimensions were more fluid than anyone had imagined. Their story sparked a quiet revolution across multiple universes, challenging ancient laws and assumptions. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, though he could feel the answer in the quantum vibrations of their shared consciousness. "Now," Lyra said, her laugh still sounding like wind chimes even in their energy form, "we explore. There are infinite dimensions out there, and infinite possibilities." Hand in hand, or energy field and energy field, they turned toward the unexplored regions of their expanding multiverse. Behind them, their love story continued to ripple across realities, inspiring others to look beyond the boundaries of their existence. And on quiet nights in a small village on Earth, when the stars seemed to shine with unusual brightness, people would sometimes tell tales about the farmer's son who fell in love with a star and became a legend. The universe, it seemed, had infinite space for new kinds of love.